Welcome to the Relationship Toolbox, a show about the skills we need to build healthy relationships with others. Today we're going to tackle the topic of trust in relationships. Do any of these circumstances ring true with your experience? Your teenage child has disobeyed you. You agreed that she would be home by 11 o'clock. At 11 o'clock, she's not there. At 12 o'clock, she has not reported. And finally, at 1 o'clock in the morning, in walks your daughter as if nothing is a problem. So once you get your emotions under control, isn't it the temptation to say, how can I trust you when you say you're going to be home at 11 and you show up at 1 in the morning? Another situation might occur with a spouse. Suppose a spouse comes home and comes back with a substantial purchase. And you look at this and say, how could you do this? How can I trust you when you agreed that anything over $1,000 we would consult with each other, and you didn't consult with me at all about this purchase? Or finally, I think most of us have had this experience where our car is acting up and we take it to a mechanic, and the mechanic says, oh, I know exactly what's wrong with it. Leave it with me for a couple hours and I'll have it fixed good as new. You come back in a couple hours, you pay the substantial labor fee and for the parts, and as you drive home, the same situation that brought you to the mechanic occurs again. Although you may not want to go to the mechanic and say, I don't trust you, I'm sure would run through your mind of, I'm not going back to this mechanic. He doesn't seem competent to handle the situation. So these situations sort of raise two questions, Marsha, and one of them is trust something that is just fixed? You either have it or you don't. I remember some people saying trust is like pregnancy. You either are pregnant or you're not. You don't have a little bit of pregnancy. But is that true or is that a myth? And the second question is, when we lose trust, is it something that we can repair? Can we rebuild trust into a relationship if we've lost it?
Good questions, Tom. And I'm going to take the second one first because we can repair it. But a part of it is understanding what trust is and being able to unbundle it. So we might think of trust as being like this one-dimensional phenomenon. At least I did before I started researching it. And you would have kind of a sense of like you trusted somebody or you didn't trust them, but you didn't exactly know why. You instinctively knew it when you saw it or you felt it, but or when, better yet, when it wasn't present. But you really couldn't wrap your head around and be clear about why or to what extent.
Yeah, I think most of us know what it's like in a relationship, that we understand that the foundation of any relationship is built on trust, whether it's with a coworker, with our children, with a spouse or a friend. That foundation of trust has to be there. And I think, unfortunately, we've all experienced those feelings that come when all of a sudden we begin to doubt the trust in someone. They seem to be lying to us, or they're not doing what they said they would do, or their behavior is different from what they say.
And it can take a long time to build trust, and it can take just one misstep to break it. Typically, we are more inclined to judge other people as less trustworthy than ourselves, kind of like some of the other assumptions we make about others when we don't have all the information. And we act on those assumptions as well without communicating with them. And that can get us into trouble as well, without checking in.
Right. And it's kind of a trap for us, isn't it, that when we view ourselves beyond reproach in terms of trustworthiness and look at others as if, well, we can certainly spot it in them. Unless we're fortunate enough to have a friend or a spouse or someone who shares with us that feedback that, you know, when you do this, it really hurts the trust with me. We could go for a long time and wonder what's going on in this relationship. Why doesn't it feel right?
And we're more charitable with ourselves because we have more information about ourselves, and we don't always understand why somebody else might be letting us down, and we don't have that explanation. So some of the concepts that we're presenting today are from the work of Charles Feltman, and he defines trust as choosing to risk making something you value vulnerable to another person's actions. And we've talked about vulnerability and how important it is to intimacy and to effectiveness in a working relationship or closeness in a romantic relationship. So the risk that we could be taking could be about money, as in the example of the spouse, or a job, or a promotion, or any kind of goal that we're setting and trying to reach, our sense of our identity and our reputation, if somebody has shared something that we had shared in confidence, or something that we don't believe is true, or basically anything that would threaten our sense of happiness or security. Test our trust in others. So he proposes that there are 4 components of trust and encourages us to unbundle it. And I think this is where I had my aha moment. So when you actually can tease these things out and clarify why you don't trust somebody, or where somebody needs to work on it, or maybe even where I have failed, understanding these 4 components, you can consider somebody trustworthy except in this area. And it's an area where you could ask them to work on it, or you could work on it yourself. And you can identify the areas where you do trust somebody and where they might be weaker. And it may not even be conscious on their part or on our part if we're the one who's not being trusted. And you can build capacity. So when you say, can you repair it? Yes, you can repair it when you can isolate out the part or the aspect of trust that isn't strong. And so the assessment of trustworthiness can also be situational. You might trust somebody in one situation but not in another, and it helps us to understand these 4 components that might be performance or talent specific. So somebody isn't necessarily completely untrustworthy or completely trustworthy. You can really evaluate it in the situation that you find them in, and it's really quite fluid.
Yeah, I have to admit that before we started getting ready for this show, I too kind of fell into that thinking that trust is an all or nothing thing. So it's kind of fascinating to me that in the research that you've done on this, that with Feldman, that you say that there are 4 components to this. Mm-hmm. So what are these 4 components of trust? Let's hear what they are.
All right. So basically they're care, sincerity, reliability, and competence. And I think we have a slide. So in the aspect of care, this is the assessment that you have the other person's interest in mind as well as your own when you're making decisions or taking actions. This is that aspect of, I've got your back, we're in this together. And this is a key element of the whole kind of trust story. Sincerity is the assessment that you are honest and you say what you mean, and you mean what you say, and it also means that your actions align with your words. You're going to behave according to what you have said. Reliability means that you meet your commitments. You deliver on the promises that you keep. And competence means that you have the ability to do what you're aspiring to do, and that you have the skills, experience, connections, or resources to make those things happen. And if you don't, then you are willing to admit that you need to learn. So it can be manifesting that competence or saying, maybe I don't have it, so let's do this together.
So what I'm hearing so far is that, first of all, trust is not either you have it or you don't. It's on a continuum.
Mm-hmm. They're parts, yeah.
And that we tend to be quick in distrusting others while ascribing our skills in being trustful.
Or making excuses for ourselves because of external non-character reasons. Yeah.
Right. And that there are 4 types of trust that we can look at, that showing the other person that you have their best interest in mind, being honest, and that shows up with your actions and your words match, keeping commitments and promises, and being capable of delivering on what you say you can do. So what is the significance of knowing all this, Marsha? How do we apply it in our relationships?
So the aspect of care seems to be the anchoring component in trust. If you believe that somebody has your interests in mind as well as their own, you will generally be kinder and softer and more forgiving if they fail in other areas. So if you perceive that, or if you are extending that to folks, that's really the anchoring essential part of being trustworthy or trusting. So we're going to maybe give them a pass on other things. However, care alone is not enough, because we might then just have to navigate each situation, saying, I know that you have my interest in mind, but I have to see if these other components are in place for each and every encounter that we have. And that can be kind of tiresome as well.
Okay. So when I'm kind of assessing myself whether I can trust a person or not, what I'm hearing from you is that one of the key things to look for is, do I get the sense from them that they really have my best interests at heart in the way they're interacting with me? That would be a key thing.
That would be the foundation.
And then I can go on to those other components. But how do I use these 4 components when I am trying to present myself as trustworthy to others? What do I do to show that?
Well, sincerity, which is that next component, is about matching your words with your intentions and your deeds and actions with what you said. So if we look at that example that you raised at the beginning of the program with the teenager, that could be a case where sincerity was not the case. The teenager agreed to anything because she wanted to get out the door, wanted to be with her friends, and so she was willing to say, yeah, no problem, and then deal with it later. It could have also been, you kind of have to tease this out, just like you do with other things, because you can make assumptions. Maybe it was also about she wasn't the driver in the car and didn't have the means of getting home, couldn't be reliable because she lost track of time, didn't have, but it could have been about sincerity. And so the way that you can demonstrate sincerity is to be really intentional in what you say to people and avoid inaccuracies and omissions and be consistent from person to person. Like in the workplace, you want to tell, if you're managing, you want to give all of the people the same story. Sometimes if we want to be a people pleaser, we might kind of spin things a little differently for each audience.
Could be a temptation to overburden ourselves with things when we don't intend to, but as you say, we feel we need to take it on, so we do, only to let people down, and then we've influenced that area of trust again.
Right, and if we're spinning a story just a little differently because we don't think the audience is able to hear it, then maybe our sense of sincerity is going to be questioned as well. And sometimes if you change your mind about something, it's important to go back and kind of rehabilitate that perspective and say, well, new information has come up, and so we're going to proceed in this way, or I'd like to reconsider. And sometimes people don't circle back.
To re-engage the person and to
re-engage.
Let them know situation has changed.
Right. Yeah. And so they're perceived as insincere and untrustworthy because their words and their deeds are not matching. But they haven't gone back to all the stakeholders, or even if it's just a twosome, to re-inform the person, like, my objectives have changed, or the operation has changed. So that's really important. So be clear, be intentional, be consistent, and if there's a change, communicate that.
Okay. And I understand too that incompetence there, which is make sure I have the skills and the knowledge and resources to do what I say I can do. And sometimes I think people may fail at that because they may not have the organizational skills to follow through with that. That may be something that they're just not talented in, but their intent is good. It's just they don't have the skills to do that.
They could be a good person. They could actually want to do the service or provide the product and not have the talent or skills.
Right.
And sometimes we get into these traps because people confer competency on us because we've proven ourselves in another domain. And so they assume that we'd also be good at this other task. And if you don't correct that assumption, and sometimes we don't because we are so eager to be identified as competent people. We may hide behind our anxiety of like, I'm not really sure how to do this, but I'll figure it out and I'll deliver.
If we don't have those skills to say in some way that maybe this is beyond my capability and risk, people assessing us differently then or evaluating us.
Or I don't have the time, or I don't have the resources. Right. You might be very good at it, but you just cannot do it.
So what again, if I'm in a situation where people are ascribing some skills to me or ability to me that I don't think I really have, what are some ways that I can tactfully and gracefully indicate that, no, this is really something beyond what I can do, so that I end up hopefully building trust rather than more doubt in my abilities?
By overpromising, perhaps. Well, you could be courageous and honest and assertive and say, I'm really flattered that you think that I could do this, but I don't really have, I'm not confident that I might be able to, I might falter. Could I get some help? Or could I get some training? Or and it could also be about, I need more time, because sometimes, like in the reliability piece, we might think we're delivering, we are satisfying the request, but we're not clear. We haven't checked expectations.
Right.
I've asked you to do something and you've agreed, but I haven't been clear about it. And so you think that you've delivered it on time the way I wanted it, complete.
What I think you wanted is not what you wanted.
And we haven't been clear with each other.
So we have a conflict there.
So we have mismatched expectations because sometimes we offer like softer requests to be polite because we're not comfortable with asking somebody something pointed. We're trying to reduce a power imbalance, and we're being a little bit apologetic. And sometimes that can complicate things by muddying it all. Instead of saying, this is what I need, this is who should do it, this is how I want it to look, and this is the time frame that I need it in. Right. And with that kind of clarity, which isn't, it's just good practice, good communication practice. So you don't end up having mismatched expectations.
And we have to be careful. I think we've talked about personalities or communication styles in the past, and this is where the passive style can get us into trouble with trust, because if we take something on and we're thinking to ourselves, this is the last thing I really want to do, and so we end up defaulting on that, but to let them know, basically, see, I couldn't do this. What we've done is really killed our ability to be trustworthy for the other party in our inability to assert ourselves and say, no, this isn't quite something that I want to do or can do, and be upfront with the person there.
And sometimes in a relationship, in a social relationship, we can negotiate that. In a workplace, you might not be able to.
It's trickier, isn't it?
But you can ask clarifying questions and just kind of normalize it in an assertive speech, but not aggressive or not apologetic, that like, this will be hard for me to complete under these terms. If we went back and looked at some of these other examples, I think we can identify where we think there was a break in trust, but we may also just have to ask the other person, where. If we look at that, again, the teenager, it could have been about not being sincere in the agreement. It could have been losing track of time, although to lose track of 2 hours is a little hard to stretch.
Right.
It could have been that that person was at the mercy of another driver. So it could have been the competence of getting herself home. In the case of the spouse making a purchase, we hope that it's not that care component, because the care component is really like the Rock of Gibraltar anchor.
Right. The other ones wouldn't matter as much, the other components of trust, if I don't feel the caring.
It could be that the person, forgot the conversation. They might need to be reminded. That would be discouraging.
Yeah.
It could be that they were just, maybe they have a problem. Maybe they have a problem with spending, which is the competency thing, and need to have support in that way.
Or maybe they promised something that they really didn't intend to carry out. They thought maybe it would be something that would be tolerated.
Or they were just so exuberant in their care that they went against the agreement. In the case of the mechanic, or it could be a craftsman, or it could be somebody doing a delivery service, they might have been a good company, well-meaning, did it on time, but just didn't have the skills.
Or it could be that the mechanic is an excellent mechanic on those areas he's familiar with.
Might be a car,
so he got into assessing something that was beyond his experience, and therefore wasn't able to deliver as he had promised.
Wanted to help you out because he's done other cars that were fine, but then this new model.
His skills in doing other fixing of cars
didn't know how
to
work with an electric car, but had done, so it could have been, and sometimes you just need to check in, because in order to restore that trust, we can have the conversation, help me understand
So to kind of summarize here, if I'm beginning to question one of those components of trust and everything, it seems like the first thing that I need to do is to pay attention to the feelings that I'm experiencing. We've discussed this in other areas of relationships, that our feelings give us the cue that something is not right. Or they give us a cue also when things are wonderful. But we need to pay attention to them and to label them. And once we've determined, yep, my feelings are indicating something's not quite right here, and it seems to be in the area of trust, well, which one of those 4 components, the care, the sincerity, the reliability, or the competence, which one is involved in this, or several of them? And then it's important, if I'm going to be approaching the person with it, to be very specific about behaviors. So I'm not talking about the person. You are not a trustworthy person. And I'm talking with, when you did this behavior, this is the effect it had on me.
Kind of like our I messages. And we're not making accusations, and we're not talking about something that is an immutable characteristic. It was just a behavior. And
the other thing, too, which is kind of a humbling experience, which we talked about at the beginning here, is there some way that I might have contributed to this conflict, either in misunderstanding, setting up an expectation that really wasn't expressed to the other party.
Being unclear about your expectations, vague.
So those are, again, things that I need to take a look at. And then I need to determine, I guess, is this relationship with this person one that I really want to engage in a conversation about it? For example, with the mechanic, I may not want to have a conversation with the mechanic about it. I may just say, I'm never going back to that person again to work on my car, and that resolves it for me. But when I do want to, the relationship is important to me, so I do want to engage the other party.
If you have a good mechanic, though, you don't want to just, that could be a very important relationship.
It might be worth it, yes. So I need to determine that. And then to take a look at what they have done, basically, that, again, being specific in the behavior and define it. And then do a lot of listening, because it could be when confronted with something like that, honesty and trustworthiness is something that really is close to most of us. So that if we begin to feel that someone is criticizing us, it could bring the defensive behavior pretty quickly. So then it's real important to use those other skills we've talked about in the past on shows of doing a lot of listening without interrupting, not attacking the person, and doing a lot of restating of what they're telling us so that they feel, okay, I'm heard, and they feel a little bit safer in acknowledging and owning what contributed to the distrust.
And if it's us who has done this and we've gone through that inventory of our own and we need to acknowledge what we've done and try to repair it through an apology. I think we've done another episode on apologies. I think it was like back number 14 or something that you could find, or contact us and we'll try and help you. And I've done a lot of thinking about the people in my life, both in my family, my friends, my coworkers, and just neighbors and things, and thought about how celebrating where I can trust people. You know, I think about you know, my son in particular, that I don't have any misgivings about these quadrants because I know that he cares about me and that generally our words are sincere and he's pretty reliable, and I think he's competent in more areas than he really is, but he tries to come through. And I think it's also a great way to celebrate and to look at our relationships. And you know,
it's a good way to show appreciation
as
We've
well.
shown that how important that is in relationships. So rather than concentrating on when somebody has defaulted on that trust, to be able to say to someone, one of the things I value in our relationship is how much I feel I can trust you.
And I know all of these areas now. And the places where I just feel a little bit shaky, I know where I can exert my influence on that and be really specific about a deadline or my words, and checking in on the agreement and making sure. And maybe I've contributed to that. I think, you know, looking at my contribution maybe to this, the disconnect in expectations is really important too. And I think we haven't been comfortable talking about trust because it's big and risky, and if you think of it as monolithic and just one thing, it's hard to get your head around it. But if you can think about it at these four components, it's a richer, deeper, more complicated phenomenon.
Well, it helps us to focus again on the behavior and not the person.
Exactly.
And that might be easier to hear than to feel that someone is attacking me as a person.
And to ask. And you could also assess that, you know, maybe there are people in your life that have served and maybe you can't as well, which is a hard conclusion to come to. But I've really enjoyed unpacking what trust is and the components of trust. I hope that we've helped you look at trust with a little deeper vision, and that you will have some tools to talk to the people in your lives about building and repairing, and
including children.
Certainly children, and modeling for them how they can demonstrate being a trustworthy person. And we look forward to meeting with you again to talk about other topics on the Relationship Toolbox.